according to my experience, I've worked with the issue of human rights, Roma rights, something like more than 30 years. And I have had opportunity during my working time to visit, I would claim, all the European countries. The living conditions, the housing conditions especially, are the worst of all population group in Europe. Very usual phenomenon is that the Roma are outside of the urban planning of the towns. In their housing issues, they doesn't have usually electricity, pure water, not any ways for the public transportation, no schools, no human being living kind of conditions. I was working 2002-2006 in Council of Europe as a special advisor on Roma issues on European level. And during that time, when we had the second largening of EU, where the Bulgaria, Romania, Slovakia, Hungary, and Czech Republic applied the membership to European Union, we got invitation, with many human rights, let's say, specialists from Amnesty, from all kind of, human rights sources, who made thorough reports on what is the reality in those applicant countries regarding their infrastructure, democratic development, whether they have corruption, whether their human rights are in good condition or not, whether there is any rights for anybody inside of the borders of those countries. Mr. Commissioner Olli Rehn got all those reports. His concrete answer to us was, it is more important for the European Union economic market to enlarge, in particular to the east. The human rights issue, it's on the paper, but it's not important. It's not the priority. And now we are paying the fee for that. The European Union never thought through really what happens with a growing migration flow. Now they are thinking, and it was planned, that all those who are well educated, IT personnel, architects, doctors, researchers, they would be the one who supposed to move from one country to another and give services to the other EU member states and be very good newcomers. But the actual fact is that inside of European Union is today, according to recent EU Medias report, 89 million poor people suffering of deep poverty, which means that the immigration flow is growing. And the national member states, they have to be prepared to give guidance, counseling, social housing, some kind of temporary structures to receive these people who are not so well off, who are not rich, who are not well educated. But actually, we are not daring to say issues like they are. And the fact is that nobody likes Roma because they are so socially marginalized, because they are poor and uneducated, because they are not well off, they are not rich, they are not well educated, and so on and so on. Today, we have a very big snowball in our hands, which means that the snowball is a cause of the neglectance of 1,000 years of responsibilities from the national state side. Now, at the moment, nobody wants to touch upon this snowball because it is such a big economical and social problem. Commissioner Viviane Reding said 2010, when we had the second Roma summit organized by the European Union, when she spoke there, she said that the European Union Social Fund do have more than 159 millions unused money, where the national member states have had the possibility to apply this money, but they never applied, they never used it. Only 10% of all these resources have been used by the member states.
on the field, what I saw, and what we see every day, is that all of these countries have very weak institutions. Nobody is dealing with the poverty. They're dealing only in theoretical way. And my second question is, what's going on and what's happened with the European fund and the money who was spent in those countries to fight against the poverties? This is a lot of funds. For example, Bulgaria was suspended like a country to using the European Union structural funds. 300 million. Where is this money?
Everything is related to the political will, the attitudes of decision makers. May they be on the parliament level or in the local municipality level. Everything is related to the social, also the fairness, the positive attitudes. Do we want to solve this issue? There are possibilities, but it depends on whether the decision makers want to use them.
What are the 4 reasons that people actually do give? This is not theory. This is the arguments people do give why they voted against providing shelter. It's very simple, but let me list the arguments. One is there's a pull factor. The more we provide shelter or other services, the more Helsinki will get Roma people. So that is one argument. We can come back. But this is the first people say. They don't say, and we don't want that. That's only implied. So that's number one. The second argument, quite serious. We don't want substandard living. We don't want slums. We don't want ghettos in Helsinki. That's number 2. And there again, the implied thing, poverty is something we left behind. So it's not accepted that it's there. The third argument, it's not our problem or it's not our capacity. The problem must not be solved at the Helsinki level. The European Union must take care of it. And the fourth argument, which you don't hear so much in the city council, the city board, but which I think is a very significant argument, which we have to take more seriously than we usually do, is this. They are bad people.
We heard Thomas Wahlgren from Finnish Parliament, Social Democratic Party, mention these 4 arguments, and one of them is that the Roma are bad people, yes? And we hear from the floor that it's so stupid we don't even need to think about it. But he doesn't think so, because he was in the discussion when it split the Social Democrats down the middle to hear this argument, because it comes from the very appealing false pragmatism of right-wing thought. So you must rebut this. Correlations between an ethnic group and crime are not a sound basis for discrimination, because it still remains prejudice.
So the first one comes from a Belfast lorry driver called Anton Bremner, and he's 39 years old. And he says, "For God's sake, after all the bloodshed over the years, can't we all just live peacefully alongside our neighbours, whatever religion or race?" So that's the first quotation. The second one was a letter to a certain Patrick Yu, who is the executive director at Northern Ireland Council for Ethnic Minorities. And this letter came from the UDA, which is a paramilitary group, Ulster Defence Association, from the youth wing. So these people are quite young, maybe teenagers. And this is what the letter said in response to the Roma. "No sympathy for foreigners. Get out of our Queen's country before our bonfire night on July the 11th and parade day on July the 12th. Other than that, your building will be blown up. Keep Northern Ireland white. Northern Ireland is only for white British." So that gives you an idea of the extreme reactions that we had. So what is it we're talking about here? What happened? Well, In 2009, there were 20 Roma families who moved into Belfast, and they were actually given housing.
This situation with both Roma from Eastern Europe and say the A2 countries like Romania, recent immigrations to the UK, and for Roma travellers and Irish travellers, there is this kind of fire triangle situation where you have the public indignation, public hatred is one of the main ingredients of the problem. And this public indignation feeds the lack of political will, because it's seen as an accepted fact across Europe that you had nothing to lose politically by failing to help Roma. So this is another pillar of the triangle. And I think the third is probably misinformation and the media. This is the basic narrative which excuses any kind of action which is bad against Roma, whether they have a nomadic past or not, is this idea that they should want to travel, basically. And that isn't seen as being a past economic reality, it's seen as being a present and future romantic reality, that they must want to do that. And that's just a mistake, I think.
Our big problem at the moment is we as gypsies are always living under domination of other nations. We are not in the situation as Jewish people to go to Israel or elsewhere where we could be rescued. Our situation depends on the goodwill of other nations, and in the moment the goodwill of these nations is not given.
And we shouldn't forget the fact that Roma has been a target of prejudices and very cruel handling almost 1,000 years. We lived through a genocide. We lived through slavery, social and every kind of marginalization. We have been living here 500 years now. And still today, I, as a, let's say, educated Roma woman, I know about my rights. I have been working with my rights and other Roma's rights for more than 30 years. And still today, when I am going out from my home door today here in Finland, I meet racist attitudes. I meet negative stereotyping of me as a Roma woman. Just because I'm wearing this dress, so I'm recognizable as a belonging to these bad people, as you said. We are the bad people whom nobody wants to deal with.
And the fact that we have all sorts of ethnicities and people with other mentalities and other sets of values, that most Finns don't conceive that as an enrichment, but as a threat. There's an old saying, we don't hate foreigners, we're just afraid of them. Xenophobia.
Roma people probably know this better than I do, but I do feel that the integration isn't complete yet. There is a big barrier, and we don't understand each other, and we don't even know each other. We don't even have Roma friends. We are very secluded. We segregate ourselves from them, and then we start shouting that there is a problem with segregation because this area of housing has become really, really bad because of the migrants there. And the fact is that we've moved away. Statistics show that when you have immigrants, 20% of an area's population are immigrants, that is when the Finns start moving away. And when we talk about Finnish people, we are able to talk about, and now I mean white native Finnish people, we are able to talk about like segregation and stuff quite intelligently. We know that we should have all kind of housing in one area, we should have something for the rich, something for the poor, something for everybody, so that it's like balanced. And then we talk about social problems, if we have one. But when we come to talk about migrants or people that are not Finnish, then we talk about cultural problems or stuff. And these are two different things.
I also think.
Yeah,
yes.
and this is very important to separate these two things. And this I learned, actually, I was in Oslo, where they had this horrible tragedy this summer where this guy shot a lot of young people. And the way that they have tackled that is completely different than we do. They talk about this, that do not confuse culture and social problems with each other.
but I think there are certain structural reasons for Romophobic or anti-immigrant policies in all European or all global metropolises, and there are kind of to understand this, it's kind of important to understand the Roma also as workers or as part of the labor force, and to try to investigate a bit the forms of regulating or controlling the labor force in capitalism, in contemporary capitalism. And then, of course, a new aspect has appeared when the Roma have used the only practical right that EU citizens have, which is the freedom of movement. And they have moved to Western European countries to seek for better working conditions, better economic conditions. Now there has, of course, kind of appeared a new form of racist discrimination, a new form of regulation of mobility, which kind of seems to have officially no racist background, in the sense that it would be clearly stated against Roma, but it's kind of immediate discrimination of poverty. But this poverty, of course, the reason of the poverty is that they are Roma and they have been discriminated in their home countries.
From our northern points of view, begging on the streets is not the way to earn your daily living. It's not a work. Maybe somewhere else in Europe that can be acceptable. In our geographical situation and the weather conditions, that is not possible.
And when the first Roma beggars appeared on the street corners in Helsinki, that was a total shock for the Finnish population. Those people sit there and beg. Finns would rather commit suicide than beg.
If you think of begging, which actually is not the most important means of living for many of the Roma in Finland, they do many other things, is that if in comparison to being on reality TV or Big Brother, it's kind of hard to see why begging would not be work. or people talking crap in some seminars, artists and writers coming here to talk bullshit about what should we do. It's kind of both are communicative work, and communicative work now is kind of very essential to capitalist economy in general.
It pays out really to think about this migrational aspect of work. That's also something I think we should see separately from the social housing question on this national or local level. I think somebody for sure has the numbers, maybe Etu has more numbers of that, about that, how much percent of the overall working force is actually migrant workers, and to detach this whole issue a little bit from the Roma question. I don't like this word, Roma question and resolution and so on. To detach it from this, and this would maybe also bring acceptance.
There are also examples from the Paris sans-papiers movement. There were also workers without papers, basically African workers, that were able to do really big protests in Paris because the Paris is dependent on their grey work. Also, the similar protests were happening in Los Angeles, in California, where the Mexican cleaners who were also working without legal status really managed to stop the whole city. So because the city is so dependent on their illegal, let's say illegal work, but actually this is the place where the capital is generated.
The problems of society are always expressed most extremely in those most vulnerable groups. And so in this group we have the problem of mobility, and we have the problem of precarious work, which all of us face. A lot of us here are cultural workers or knowledge workers, I would assume, and we all face the same problem in lesser form of being precaritized. And I think this is going to happen, especially with the collapse of the economy, if that does come to be, which some people predict in the very, very near future. We're going to be faced with a very, very severe kind of change in social structure. And in order to face that, we need to redefine what it means to work.
We were thinking probably there is an option to provide a project that would, for example, build a kind of workers' hotels in each European city. For example, you have in Paris one, in Helsinki one, in London one, or 2 or 3. And the people could maybe go and stay there 6 months or 1 year, you know. And this actually, there are money in European Social Fund for such idea is realizable. This is not utopian idea because there is a possibility in European Social Fund for these kind of things. But is this realistic? How this is? Do you think this kind of idea is possible, or do you think this is a good idea?
Well, a simple answer would say, from my personal point of view, it is possible, and it is preferable. It could be done. Very much of all this is related to the attitudes of political decision makers, of national town hall persons who are sitting on the decisions, whether they would like to, whether they want to do. It's about political will.
I think the most revolutionary point could be, from my point of view, is to make a social building or a concept which make very clear to gypsies that they are welcome. I don't know exactly how this could look in an architectural way, but I think it must be a space which allows not only to stay there, which allows to the people to create also their own space.
I think this is a very useful concept, more specifically for the issue of economic migration between countries. And it has the advantage of not necessarily being Roma-specific,
yes,
because politically this is a problem. If you have any money which is targeted to a specific ethnic group, people would view this as a specialized fund, and it's essentially a reverse racist attitude. So yes, I would support that.
I think the key problem is that these newcomers, that the immigrant Romas, they simply fall out from this system. They are not part of them kind of national citizenship. Somehow the authorities have an excuse to say no. They have an excuse to say, well, it should be Europe who is solving that. It's not our problem. Go back to your home country, whatever. I mean, all those are actually urban questions. They are not national questions. And that's why we have a strong point in saying that we should have a more vocal, a better formulated urban level of thinking these issues. Basically, this notion of urban citizenship, if I try to define it in a very simple way, it should be understood as the right of those who inhabit cities to have a stake in the process. Basically, it's very close to them, very, very old Henri Lefebvrean idea of right to the city. If you have this kind of broad political acceptance of urban citizenship as some kind of background element there, this should open a new institutional space to find local, also experimental solutions. We can create a kind of set of platforms of innovation across Europe through rethinking the mode of production of urban space and through rethinking the way how we in a way produce welfare, and welfare in this case understood more broadly not as public service but as a co-produced well-being for human beings. But I think the key point is that if we start from some kind of temporary solution, if we start from providing shelter, which I think is the first step that has to be done, it should not be understood as some kind of camp. It should not be understood as some kind of scout tents somewhere. It should be understood as seed of a permanent new kind of urban district. There should be a long-term promise from the city that you can stay here and you can develop your conditions. in Finland there still today is strong acceptance of the self-help and self-construction, which is one of the strong elements in finding a solution for this particular contemporary question.
Panu's proposal of the urban citizenship, very interesting. I think this is also a theme that has been a lot of discussion about, that the metropolises or the great cities could be the places where new rights are created, new institutions and new forms of rights for people who have been marginalized by the nation states also. This, of course, has a kind of... But one important point in this is that you also then have to understand that the rights only kind of come to exist if they are created from below.
How do we create a kind of expanded notion of citizenship? And not only perhaps urban citizenship, that's where I would disagree with you, Panu, but even kind of trans-city citizenship, something that you could build up a kind of alternative economy of some kind of credits, which I suggested last time, or some way of that you can communicate and build up a social economy which connects different cities.
You're talking about urban citizenship and local citizenships. For me, from Germany, that should be European citizenship. That's the original idea of the EU.
Of expanding the notion of labor, expanding the notion of citizenship, expanding our understanding of what it means. And going back to what Miranda was saying already yesterday about basic human rights, what I was saying about this is in the UN Charter, it's not a utopia. It's a basic fact that we all need shelter, we all need housing, we all need to feed our children, etc. So we have to make that possible.